Hello and welcome back, MC1 Gamer, back for round 2 of the unlocking for GHB 17, Age of Sigmar. Today we're joined by James Ryan. I always pronounce your name, I think, wrong. Squyres?
Yep, that's correct.
It's just spelled a little differently.
Yep, Old English.
Well, James is a fellow Death player, and we've been on a number of shows together. And you have your own show, Tactica Tuesday, with Paul Conti, where you discuss the finer details of list building and strategies for Age of Sigmar. So that's something I would hope that everybody is, if you haven't figured out, James, where James's YouTube channel is, go check him out. James, you and I have been talking for a long time about death and death lists and where the meta's gone and things like when the GHB first came out, the first one, as well as this one upcoming. You've had a lot of feelings about the new rules and just give me some perspective, because we're going to talk about today Soulblight, which is a specific faction, the vampire-centric faction. Give me your impression of Soulblight specifically, and what do you think of the changes and where Soulblight now fits with the upcoming meta?
Okay. Well, first off, I'd like to say thanks for saying that our show, Tactica Tuesdays, is the finer points of anything. I think that's a little bit gracious. But
no, you guys have really good content.
Well, thank you. But with Soulblight, Soulblight excites me. And Death, honestly, has not excited me in terms of the rules, the new releases for Age of Sigmar for a long time. I was naturally a bit of a pessimist whenever I saw the first General's Handbook came out. I was kind of like, oh no, Doom is here, Doom is here. And when I saw the General's Handbook 2 coming out, some of the leaked stuff, again, I started to go back to that point. And of course, you were the exact opposite. You're like, James, you're not getting the point here. And I thought, you know what, maybe Mitch is right. And I took a deeper look at it, and I was like, whoa.
Wait, hold on a second. For the audience, let's mark the date, mark the calendar, mark the time. Mitch is right?
Yeah. Yeah, it happens every now and again.
Yeah, even a broken clock is correct twice a day, right?
Right. But I started looking at Soulblight, and I was like, whoa, like some of the combinations, some of the math started to really add up in some really impressive ways. And I was like, okay, yeah, we've lost some things with Death in this new update, but the tricks Soulblight specifically can do, we've really been flipped on a 180, and things that were our weaknesses, now we are strong against. And so I'm really excited for that going forward.
Well, you want to elaborate a little more on that? Let's hear. You don't have to go do a too deep a dive, because we'll go and look at war scrolls, we're going to look at lists, we're going to look at allegiances. But can you give us just like a surface view of what you mean?
Sure. So, for Death players, especially if you've played like the larger Grand Alliance for a while now, other than just Tomb Kings, like shooting and things like that could really reach out and hit you from a distance, that's been a problem for Death. Now, that's not to say we didn't have any fast units. We did, but the vast majority of the war scrolls we had available, zombies, skeletons, you have it, were slower comparatively to a lot of their peers, and so it would take us a couple turns to get across the battlefield to deal with opponents shooting or enemy fast units. They could kind of pick the fights. Well, now with Soulblight, that's been flipped on its head, because everything in the army is fast. There's so many buffs that we can give them to make the entire army flying, or to speed up a different unit here or there, to give our general kind of hit and fade style of abilities, to reduce enemy bravery for a turn, so that our battle shock is more effective with things like the Blood Knights and all. So really, we've become a much faster army that, honestly, to some degree, plays almost how I would imagine Khorne would play. Like, we are so fast, and we just want to charge across the battlefield, get in the enemy's face, and bring it to them as fast as we can.
Yeah, the way I look at, there are obviously some very distinct differences with Khorne, but I look at the vampire army in the parallels you're seeing. I can definitely see, but I see them as being more a surgical strike army, as opposed to the mass bulk, just overwhelming, whether it's just a big bloodthirster or 120 bloodletters, where the vampire army, the Soulblight army, is it looks like, even the way we played it when the Grand Alliance, when we focused on that keyword, it seemed to be more of an MSU, where the units were strong, they were powerful, but it was definitely something you had to supplement in the previous, and we didn't have the benefit with all of the Death lists, unless you were playing FEC, of having any variety of battalions. Still don't really have that, so we're going to get beat out by the low drop count armies to be able to get first turn and such. But we make up for that by being able to move fast now and have some additional abilities that plug some holes. So you have some lists that we're going to go over, but what do you see as some of the weaknesses even now of Soulblight?
Definitely looking at the new scenarios that.
Oh, you're still with us?
Okay, I was like, it looked like it had dropped me for a second there. So.
Nope, I still see you.
Okay, it's telling me that it crashed, so I literally can't see anything.
Oh, so we might actually lose you? Well, if that's the case, you just pop back in. I think we might have actually lost you. Okay, so while we're waiting for James to come back, let's talk a little bit about what some of the issues have been with death. I mean, some of the death lists that we've seen in the past, with the GHB1 and with Age of Sigmar, I guess 2016, we've seen Flesh Eater Courts, certainly a much better diverse type of an army with battalions, with a lot of different types of war scrolls, and their own allegiance abilities. And Death has only really had, other than that, its own overriding allegiance abilities for the Grand Alliance. Tomb Kings notwithstanding, I don't want to discount Tomb Kings, but Tomb Kings, is it's a compendium army. People are going to still play it. It's still competitive, but it just kind of feels like it's starting to get pushed out with a lot of the compendium scrolls. But other than Tomb Kings and Flesh Eater Courts, you really just had the Grand Alliance. Hey, is that you back?
Yep. Sorry, my computer crashed.
So I'm just kind of just like giving the lay of the land. So with the new, I mean, there have been a lot of ways to build. You could build Death Rattle centric. You can build the Nagash list with lots of zombies. There's lots of different things that you can do that were effective. But were they really competitive? Were they really top tier competitive? And did they have the flavor of a specific type of army within a keyword structure, like its own subcategory, subfaction? And now we're seeing that. Now we're going to see Night Haunts, which I'll do in another video. We're going to have a variety of different armies with their own allegiance abilities. We're probably going to see a resurgence with Death Rattle as well. There seems to be a lot of that on the horizon. But Soulblight is the one that a lot of people weren't sure if it was going to happen. We were hoping that we were going to get a battle tome for Soulblight, but having allegiance abilities and some of the changes with GHB 2017 are very encouraging. So you were about to say before you got unfortunately kicked off the internet. What was it? What was the point you were about to make?
I believe it was about their weaknesses. Was that it?
Yep. Yeah. There's still some holes I think they need to fill. But what do you look at as some of their strengths and weaknesses of Soulblight right now?
Well, the strength is number one, that they're fast and super mobile compared to anything that we've experienced as Death for an entire army capabilities. I mean, the fact that with the Bloodline Swift Death, you get a +2 inch movement to your entire army, and everyone gains flying. That's a really good ability. Like, a large percentage of the subfaction already had flying, but to give it to everyone else, so your Blood Knights and your Vampire Lord, even on a horse or something, that's a really nice ability. So they can kind of keep pace. There is no hiding your opponent's general behind a line of troops or behind a building or something like that. We can just jump right over it, hit you, and it just doesn't even matter. And then definitely we're an elite army, so if we pick our fights well, then we can smash just about anything else, pound for pound in the weight class of the units that we can bring. But the weaknesses are definitely, in light of the new scenarios, the fact that we can't bring large squads. Like, literally our largest squads are maxed out at 15, and some of the scenarios have a tiebreaker effect of if a squad is 20 or more strong, then you win the tiebreaker regardless of how many enemy models are actually within range of that objective. And then, of course, again, we don't have any shooting. That's somewhat negated by the fact that we're so fast, but it does mean that in certain scenarios, depending on how the opponent places their troops, that we might have to suffer some incoming fire for a little while.
Yeah, I'm a little concerned about that, because there are some tenets that you really need to have in place to have a competitive army, to have a top-tier army. And there are things like mobility, the ability to dominate, to compete in all phases, and hopefully dominate in one. And things like being able to survive, have some survivability. It could be the regeneration factor, where you restore models. It could be the ability to avoid damage, like you see with like Nurgle. It could be resistances to mortal wounds, being able to dish out mortal wounds. Some array of this stuff you need to have in all these different silos, but you need to be able to act in all the different phases. And shooting is one that I think even Soulblight is going to be deficient in. But it can be made up for, and we've seen that with things like Flesh Eater Courts. If you're a fast-moving army and you can overwhelm your opponent, and you can have the resilience, either you're a shock army and you can hit hard and hit first, or you can and dictate when that fight is happening, or if you can survive the impact and then counterattack, that you will find yourself successful. I think Soulblight may be able to overcome that, but the new GHB ally rules means that we can plug those holes.
Yep.
So if we do have those deficiencies, we won't be. You can find a way to get around it. So the armies that you played before this, have you played anything that was Soulblight ish? Have you played Blood Knights? Have you played Vargeists?
I've brought every model that wasn't a Bat Swarm to to a game before from Soulblight. I wouldn't run a Death Army actually without some form of Soulblight in my army, whether it was Blood Knights, whether it was a Vargeist. Almost every game I'd have either a Vampire Lord on Zombie Dragon or just a Vampire Lord with the Dread Wings or whatever you could give it, or even a Coven Throne, because I think that model at 260 can be a pretty good value if used properly.
Yeah, I used it at Adepticon, and it served me very well until it got blasted off by 27 Skyfires in one game. But other than that, it was extremely effective, and I still think it's a very good value at 260. I'd actually wish it would go down a couple of points, to be honest with you, but you know, it still does fight at least at its weight class.
Yes, I agree. The one reason I think it maybe should have a little bit of a points reduction is it's the only hero in the Soulblight army that can't heal itself.
Right, you can get around that with certain artifacts and such, but
yes,
we can talk about that. I know we've played that. I gave the Coven Throne Tomb Blade.
Yes,
and that allowed me, and plus I had other elements that were able to heal, either a character who could heal or the Mortis Engine that had the explosive heal. So there are ways that I could keep that Coven Throne alive, but it's in and of itself, its own abilities, it doesn't have it. Okay, yeah, and I know that you were very partial to taking lots of Death Rattle stuff for a while too, but I know that you've always included that Vampire Lord and Zombie Dragon, and that's kind of like it's probably one of the best point-for-point powerful units in the game. The big model, big centerpiece.
It's my baby.
Let's see it. All right, let's get a focus in there. Hold on. You talk so the camera gets on you.
Yeah, this one's my baby. I mean, she's the leader of my entire Death Army, Lady Sinessa. I've spent probably close to 30 hours now between customizing the model and painting her up to the level that she's currently at. She's still not done, but she's literally got everything on her. She's got a custom sword, a shield, so I can give her either of those, the lance, the blood chalice in her hands from the Coven Throne set. She's standing on a broken orc chariot. Yeah,
I only have one problem with it. It's still on a square base, man.
Yeah. I do eventually plan to replace that, but whenever I bought it, the only one that they had currently was the square base, and I actually got it at a discount, so I was like, I'm not going to complain.
No, don't. But it's a great model. It's definitely served me well. I've got two of them, and I magnetized the heads. So if I want to use them for FEC, I can remove the guy and put a Ghoul King on it, and then throw a Terrorgeist head on it if I need to.
Yeah.
But it's in a different format. But still, you know, everybody's seen that Vampire Lord on a Zombie Dragon on the table, and there have been some incredible combos that has been used before the current GHB. So what kind of things have you seen? Have you used it with? Like before we even get into what this met is, it's good to kind of get a little feel for where things where we've come from. What are some of the powers and benefits of utilizing combos with artifacts from the general Death Alliance, the Allegiance abilities? What kind of combos did you used to use?
I would always pick the Lord of the Night, or what was the one that buffed it from a 6-up to a 5-up?
Yeah, that's gone.
Yeah, I know, that's a shame. Yeah, but it does make it easier now to go and play just the sub-factions like Soulblight. Yeah.
But you used to use the Ring of Immortality, right?
Before the FAQ, yeah.
You know, hey, look, that's back.
It is back,
and it's better. And not only that, the Cloak of Mist and Shadows.
Yep, I use that a lot as well. I would stick that on my Vampire Lord, and I'd be like, somehow the cloak covers the dragon too, and it teleports across the battlefield.
Hey, magic.
Exactly.
But now those are back, and those are better. So there were some really interesting combinations. I remember the first time somebody had equipped a Vampire Lord and a Zombie Dragon with the cloak, and got that free move. I think it's a 12-inch move. and then its own 14-inch move, and then a charge,
Yep.
and boom, turn 1 in the face, probably taking down a key component unless there was bubble wrapped or screened. That's a very viable tactic, and certainly it's not something that's going to go away. All right, so I'll tell you what. Unless you have anything else that you want to talk about, why don't we go and take a look at your lists?
Okay. The only other thing I was going to say, and we can be pulling this up while I say this, is that actually my favorite part of running that particular model, running a Vampire Lord on Zombie Dragon, was the psychological effect it puts on the opponent. If your opponent has played against it, they know that's a big, nasty thing, and that can actually cause them to make mistakes. They either commit too much to trying to deal with it because they're scared of it, or else they are not familiar with it and they don't give enough care to taking care of it, and it just blows up their army.
Yeah, you throw a Mystic Shield on that thing, and you're walking around with a 2-up save.
Yeah.
And then you have, it's 14 wounds. Is it 14 wounds? I think it's 14.
I believe so.
And then if you don't drop it in one turn, it has the ability to come back pretty quickly, especially with the Chalice. Yep. So yeah, I'll tell you what. Let's go and take a look at before we even go into your lists. I want to take a look at the actual Soulblight allegiance abilities, because this really gives the new flavor of this army. And it really dictates why you picked what you picked. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen.
All right.
And then we can go ahead and jump into that. There we go. And, of course, we get that wonderful infinity effect. All right, here we go. All right, so can we see that?
Yep.
All right, so some of the initial changes. Why don't we go over them? Deathless Thralls.
This is basically the same as Deathless Minions, but it only applies to character or units with the keyword Soulblight, and it is a 6-inch range, which is what Deathless Minions now is across the board.
Yeah, it's a much shorter range, but you get the benefit of getting it from. You don't have to worry about just your general kind of being in range. Any heroes, but only heroes from the actual subfaction with the subfaction keyword. Yeah, I mean,
this is actually part of what pushes me towards Soulblight, because a lot of the death heroes in the other subfactions, again, excluding Flesh Eater Courts, they're a lot more squishy, and the Soulblight heroes can actually take a bit more of a beating. So bumping that down from a 10-inch range to a 6-inch range, it puts your hero in a lot closer to combat, so a lot more danger, and so the ability to survive a lot longer is essential. Yeah,
I've noticed that. Like, for instance, the Night Haunts are really they're surrounded by everything revolves around the Banshees and the Cairn Wraiths, and they're 4-wound models. Now they ignore Rend, but there's a lot of things that Rend doesn't come into effect, just like mortal wounds and certainly volume shooting. They're going to go down. You need a lot of them, and I think that you can absorb a lot of damage with less heroes in Soulblight. The nice thing that a lot of people are happy with is the return of Bloodlines. So why don't you give us a little bit of information about Bloodlines?
Sure. I love Bloodlines. I love that we now have this additional level of customization and complexity within our armies, so that if I play against another Soulblight army, there's actually a very good chance that they're radically different in terms of how they play on the table because of these Bloodline abilities. But we have 4 basic ones here. We have Dragon Warriors, which is you can reroll hit rolls of 1 if they've charged. That's good, but it's obviously very situational. Lords of the Night is a particularly good one if you want a defensive army, where basically your Deathless Thralls ability comes into play regardless of whether you're within range of a hero.
Yeah, I really like that one, because I can't stand the having to localize everything, stay in clumps.
I do like that one, but for me, it actually falls to number 3. I will seldom ever pick it. Necromantic is my second favorite, and if Swift Death did not exist, I would pick this one almost every single time. It's add 1 to casting or unbinding rolls for wizards that have this bloodline, and enemies subtract 1 from bravery whenever they're within 6 inches of anyone with the necromantic bloodline in the battle shock phase. Yeah,
that's nice. I like it that it's enemy units, because there were a lot of abilities in and still exist on the War Scrolls, but there were a lot of abilities that didn't work if you were dealing with a death army.
Yep. It does make me sad that it's only in the battle shock phase, because there's you could abuse that a bit more combo wise if you allied in a thing like a Terrorgeist or something. But it is still a nice ability.
Yeah, well, they probably did that for a good reason. I mean, the Terrorgeist is good enough as it is.
Yeah,
but you can't do like the old leadership bomb.
Yeah.
And then your favorite,
Swift Death, which is, like I said before, it adds 2 inches to the move characteristic of all your Soulblight units that have this bloodline, and your entire army of Soulblight models gain fly.
Now, the fly thing is what kind of sticks on my side, because most of Soulblight can fly.
Yes.
So you're
I
not
think that
getting
this is really, I think it's really just, it might as well just say, and now your Blood Knights can fly.
that's where I was going to go. Yeah, Bloodlights that now can move, what, 12 inches and can fly?
Yep.
Yeah, that's pretty much what it's all about. Okay, let's see what we got down here. Command traits.
Yeah, these are nice. You know, I mean, all of them are relatively specific to certain scenarios, but they're not bad by any means. Curse the Revenant, add 1 to your general's wound characteristic. Not bad. Obviously, it plays a little bit more of a role, I'd say, in the Night Haunts, as you were talking about earlier. They have actually the same ability. Dread Knight, reroll hit rolls of 1 for the general when they attack an enemy hero in the combat phase. I think that would be a bit better if they hadn't already specified that these kinds of abilities only work for the rider and not the mount.
Yeah,
unless specifically stated. Yeah, that would make that appeal a lot more to me if that wasn't the case. Transfix, which is kind of like what we've seen with the Coven Throne and with Isabella von Karstein. They have similar abilities. They're not the exact same. Where you can pick an enemy hero within 3 inches of the general, and they have to subtract 1 from hit rolls if they target your general that phase. That's pretty good.
Yeah, I like that one, especially when with stacking with other abilities that do the same. Of course, now 6 is all hit, so it does. It's nice to be. I don't think you need to stack too heavily, but it's nice to be able to get it from different sources.
Absolutely, especially if you're allying in something like a Morngul, for example, where that would stack.
Oh, who would do that?
Probably not me anymore, but
that's a conversation for another show.
Absolutely. Then we have my personal favorite one, Mist Form. And again, this is a bit redundant in part of what it gives, but the overall ability I still think is great. If the general retreats, they can move as if they can fly, and they can still charge in the same turn.
Oh, that is huge. I know. I saw that when they talked about that on the feeds. This is massive. The ability to get out of a bad situation and then redirect where you want to, and then charge in the same turn. Oh, that's killer.
And the best thing is, too, that a lot of people seem to forget about this, that whenever you retreat, you can actually retreat forward. So you can jump over the combat that you're in and then charge to hit the enemy's back line, even if they're trying to tie your general down.
And you have a 14-inch move, so it's a pretty good bet you can get outside of that 3-inch proximity requirement.
Yep, I'll actually have a 16, but yeah.
Oh well, yeah, you have 16 because of the specific bloodline. Yep, even better. All right, and then Killing Blow.
Yep, wound rolls of 6 or more for attacks made by the general inflict mortal wounds in addition to any other damage they inflict. Again, this is good, but it kind of stinks that it can't apply to the mount. I
was just gonna say, man, why couldn't they give it to the mount?
Yep.
All right. So, and then Blood Fury, the name, but does it live up to the old the legend of Blood Fury?
It does not quite. Add 1 to the attacks characteristic of melee weapons used by the general.
Yeah, I don't think so.
It's kind of a shame that they even put this here as not that they put it here as just an option, but that they said the attack characteristic of melee weapons, because none of the generals currently available to Soulblight can take multiple close combat weapons that are not attributed to their mount.
Yeah, well, that's pretty interesting. Yeah, I mean, look, it could be that we could be seeing, a more fleshed out Soulblight in the future, and they're just leaving it as available for for expansion, or it just could be the typical GW wordsmithing.
Yep.
All right, let's take a look at the artifacts. All right.
I think there are a couple of really good ones here as well.
All right, go ahead.
So the Slaking Blade, pick 1 weapon that this model can use, keep a tally of the number of wounds inflicted by the weapon. As soon as the total reaches 6, this model heals D3 wounds, and you can add 1 to the damage characteristic of the chosen weapon for the rest of the battle. And that's not bad.
Sweet. I think that's pretty sweet. The healing is big.
Yes. And honestly, the 1 damage characteristic can be really good, especially if you are more prone to, like, let's just say again on a zombie dragon, if you're more prone towards the vampiric sword, D3+1 is a big deal for the damage.
Yeah, I always go for the lance because I feel it averages out. It averages out. Plus, it looks cool.
It does.
All right, scabbing plate.
This model heals 1 wound at the end of any combat phase in which it inflicted any wounds on an enemy model.
I like this one because it's not a lot of these types of things are hinged upon killing. You have to kill a model. This is just inflicting a wound, and it stacks with that because a lot of the vampiric models do get a wound back if you kill the model.
Yep, exactly the point I was going to make. You can basically heal twice as fast.
Yeah, that's a big one. Okay, Crimson Wing.
This one's kind of strange to me. In your shooting phase, pick an enemy unit within 30 inches of this model, then roll a die. On a roll of 3 or more, that unit suffers a mortal wound. So it's basically just a single shot each turn from your model that's wielding this.
Yeah, but 30 inches is not bad, and it's a mortal wound.
Yes.
So I think that's pretty good. That's, what is it, a 66% hit rate?
Yep.
And a mortal wound, which, there are things out there that will protect you against mortal wounds, but they're not everywhere. Anything that gives you a little more ranged ability, I think, is interesting. But I think the special effect of this one is what makes me laugh. That it's a bat familiar.
Yes, I do like that. Someone needs to model that. If they're going to bring the Crimson Wing, you need to model the little bat.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, let's go to the Sigil of the Sanguine Throne.
My personal favorite. Once per charge phase, you can reroll a failed charge roll for a friendly vampire unit within 12 inches of this model. Now, it's important to note that it's a vampire unit, so your bats, if you choose to take them, will never get access to this.
Yeah, but I'm not. Are you talking about fell bats, or are you talking about the bat swarms?
Either or.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure. Well, yeah, the fell bats, you could be charging in with them, but you're not charging in with those bat swarms. Bat swarms are just there to kind of mitigate shooting, to make it harder for people to shoot at you. All right, so but still, rerolling failed charges for, say, a unit of Blood Knights. I had it was an Adepticon or Holy Wars, I forget which, where I just had a key charge for my Blood Knights and they failed. I would love to have had this available.
I think the biggest thing here with this ability, and the reason why I like it so much, is this is just another thing that basically ups the speed and mobility of this army even further.
Yeah. All right. So the Saccharine Goblet.
This one's interesting as well. You can use this artifact at the start of any combat phase. If you do so, you can add 1 to the hit and wound rolls for this model. However, if the model fails to inflict any wounds in a combat phase when it uses the goblet, then this model suffers D3 mortal wounds at the end of the combat phase. So
your Vampire Lord's got his chalice. He's got a goblet. He just needs to have like one of those keg hats.
Yeah. It's basically a drunkard if it's taken both.
That's not bad. It's not bad. I don't think I'd be worried that you wouldn't be able to, unless you're going up against a unit with just many layers of defense. I think it'd be pretty hard to screw that up. Even with a unit of Blood Knights, I don't think I've ever had a situation where I failed to actually at least perform 1 wound. Yeah, I do again wish that this could be applied to the mount as well. Because if you can just imagine a zombie dragon with some of those attacks that are normally a 4-up, 3-up, becoming a 3-up, 2-up with a -2 Ren for D6 damage, and just the potential here would be incredible. Yeah. All right, the Ruby Vial. Close it out with the Ruby Vial. This is my second favorite one, and I will definitely be fielding this one from time to time. You can use this vial once per battle in one of your hero phases. Until your next hero phase, enemy units must subtract 1 from their bravery and from the result of any charge rolls. I like the charge rolls one. I like them both a lot. I think that the -1 to bravery, if you time it right, if you plan, if it's like a later part of the game and you really need to move someone off of an objective, using this can be great there. Or if you're holding, the objectives and your opponent's coming to you, again, that negative to charge plays really doubly there because you're subtracting from their bravery. Because you're an elite squad, you're probably killing a large number of units unless they're an elite squad as well. And then potentially failing those key charges late in the game, that's also huge. All right. So let's go ahead and jump over to your lists. So we've got a little bit of the lay of the land here. We see what these actual allegiance abilities are. We're going to take a look just so everybody knows. I mean, if you've tuned into the one I did earlier on Sylvaneth, the format for the unlockings now is going to be fixed at 2,000 points. There just wasn't as much interest and demand for 1,000 point lists or even 2,500 point lists. Most of these event games and even most casual games that I've seen and that certainly I've heard about, just they get played at the standard competitive level, and that's 2K. So we're going to look at different types of formats. So for the unlocking series, we're going to have one that's an unaligned list, so no allies, and then two just variants, not by no means the only choices or even the best choices, but two variants on the ally lists. So in this case, let's go first and talk about, I've got that up on the screen here, so I hope you can see it.
Yep.
So let's talk about your unaligned list.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay, so for this first one, I have my Vampire Lord and Zombie Dragon as my general, and I will preface this list by saying this list is a bit of an experiment. I really wanted to highlight everything that this faction can do and what I believe they can do really well. And I am a bit of a sucker and still a little bit of a Timmy, and that's why my Vampire Lord on Zombie Dragon appears multiple times in these lists and in this one in particular. But she brings, actually, I meant to say, I believe I sent it to you wrong. The spear instead of the sword, the lance, because I do prefer the more consistent 2 damage to the die roll for it and 3 damage on the charge.
All right. Well, that's I can always just switch it out and just say, how about this? I can spell it correctly. There we go.
And that's okay. I can still go ahead. But she has the shield and chalice, so she's dishing out a lot of damage on the charge, obviously. The shield is protecting you a little bit more because it's giving you that additional +1 to your save, and the chalice is allowing you to once per game heal D6 wounds. And then Mist Form, with her ability to retreat and basically hit and run in the same turn, is huge. Opponents cannot basically tie you down by sending little chaff units into you to slow you down. You can get behind the enemy lines by flying, or you can basically hit and run or leapfrog over enemy units, hitting each one if you want to, as you move towards your #1 target. And then the Vampire Lord on horse is there to provide an additional hero to help give out the that 6-up save bubble to your other units. She's also able to fly because of the allegiance ability. The Nightmare's hooves and teeth are not great, but again, it's 2 additional attacks that have a 50% chance of hitting and a 50% chance of wounding, so that's worth having, especially because it costs you no points. I would also give her a Chalice of Blood just because, why the heck not? It's free. You can use it to heal. And then her big thing, obviously on top of all that, is her magic. I really love the Spirit Blight ability when used in conjunction with the Soulblight army, because your Soulblight army is an elite's army, so that you're going to have less models in each squad, typically when compared to your opponent. And with so many of the scenarios and what people have really projected, we're going to be seeing a bit more of a horde-based game than we did before. And so Spirit Blight, reducing all of the attacks from melee weapons to a minimum of 1 from an enemy unit is potentially huge. That can be the difference between your small elite squad surviving virtually unscathed and being wiped off the table.
Yeah, there's a lot of horde units that that are really, not garbage, but they're just they do 1 attack. They may not even have a rend. They do 1 damage, but there's a bunch that will do multiple attacks, and they may even have a good rend and may even do like die 3 wounds or 2 wounds each.
Absolutely.
If you can subtract 1 from that attack characteristic for the horde, you can very much neuter, not eliminate its danger, its ability to do damage, but really substantially reduce its effectiveness on the battlefield.
Absolutely. I'm a big fan of this spell. I first encountered it in a death versus death game, saw how powerful it could be, and I've run it in every list since.
The one thing that I really wish, because I really feel that the death armies in particular, without the Mortarks or Nagash, they just don't have a lot of pep in terms of getting these spells off against some of these the very magic heavy armies, specifically
Absolutely.
things like Tzeentch. So I would love to have seen a mechanic in the Allegiance that was like sacrificing one of your minions to get a bonus or even an automatic cast, something to give that boon, but that would be fluffy. I really wish that we would have seen something like that, because it would have been very fitting, but it would have given these guys a leg up, because these spells are very powerful, but there's so much arrayed against it that makes it difficult to get these spells off in the current meta.
Absolutely. That's why I tried to build my list where the spells are definitely a big plus, but I don't have to have them to really live or die.
Yeah, and the other disadvantage that I think that has to be considered with Soulblight is that with some of the death armies, you can have your wizards in the back, kind of buffing your masses. In this one, they're going to be forward, like you had mentioned. They're going to be in your face.
Yep.
But hey, that they're making up for it with a lot of punch. Even this Vampire Lord, he can definitely bring the pain.
Yeah, 4 attacks at D3 damage each with a rend, and really good to hit and wound characteristics of 3 up, 3 up. That's nothing to sneeze at, nothing to ignore.
I only wish that we could also use this command ability, because you're definitely using the command ability on the Zombie Dragon Vampire Lord.
Oh, absolutely. The ability to reroll. Yep.
This one with the extra attack would be sweet.
It is quite good. It's especially good, obviously, with a Horde army. And it's still clearly good with Soulblight, but part of the reason that I would not elect, in most cases, this to be my general is just because you are running smaller squads typically.
Okay, so the rest of your all Soulblight army, your battle line?
Yep. So I've got 5 Blood Knights twice, because you have to take 3 battle line units, and 6 Vargeist. And obviously, the Blood Knights are just categorically better than Vargeist. I mean, that's why they cost 100 points more. Now, that's not to say that Vargeist are just bad. They're not. But the Blood Knights heal better, have better saves. The Vargeist are a little bit faster. On a per model basis, the Vargeist have, unless it's on a charge, the Vargeist have a higher damage cap per model. Obviously, on the charge, that flips to Blood Knights. But they're both really good units. That's not to say that the Vargeist are bad in any way.
Yeah, I'm surprised you didn't try to double up on the Blood Knights. Go to 10 for at least one of these units. I found that 5 Blood Knights is very effective, but they can certainly be a little bit. They could fail you if you have some bad dice rolls. And then if they don't get their punishment on the charge, they become a tar pit unit. And I've also found that even though they're 3 wounds apiece, certainly against rending, which can start really reducing their basic save from a 3 up to a 5.
Yep.
That they start dropping, and once they start dropping, even though you can restore 1 per turn, it can be hard to kind of get them to make it back to their regular, to where they're effective, combat effective. And I haven't ever run a unit of 10, but with the extra points here, I know you're looking for bodies. I'm surprised you didn't have 1 just complete shit kicker unit of 10 of these guys.
My biggest really concern with that just simply was that to bring 10 of them is 520 points. And at a 2,000 point game, I mean, I understand that, you're going to bring units like, again, the Vampire Lord and Zombie Dragon that are a very significant point sink, but in part because I was bringing that unit, I didn't want to double up and put such a heavy investment in one other squad.
Got it. And then you have supplements with just a plethora of bats. We're talking about like 20 plus bats here.
Yeah, we're talking 21 total bats, run in 3 units. Now these are what Vince has coined the bat bombs, because that's exactly what they're going to do. You're just going to deploy them and fly them ahead of the rest of your army, and they're not amazing units. Like, I'm not going to ever make that claim, but I think that they can be effective if you use them for the right thing. And with how fast they are, and the fact is that they only make 3 attacks each. But once they're near something that dies, they don't have to have killed it. All that matters is that a model died near them. They jump to 6 attacks each for the rest of the game. So that's a very significant buff. So your 9 Fellbats in that first squad, for example, would be making 54 attacks for the rest of the game. And it's at a 4 up, no rend. But if you target either a horde of units and you just throw that Fellbat squad at them, knowing that that Fellbat squad will probably die, and you just don't care that it's going to, you just try to soften it up, then your Blood Knights and your Vargheists and even your Vampire Lord on Zombie Dragon can come right behind them and finish off that weakened unit. And that's really the goal of the Fellbats, is to act as a meat shield to some degree, soften up big heavy targets for the opponent, or of course, because they're so incredibly fast, get behind the enemy lines and hit their weaker things like wizards or lighter generals like an Empire General or something like that.
I would love to have seen, like, you include, even if you did it, which I would, this is how I would do it, as reinforcements to summon the bat swarms, even though they're the ugliest model of the game. I mean, I proxy them. But the bottom line is that they do provide a nice buffer, a nice speed bump. They also provide that wonderful 12-inch range debuff of -1 to shooting, which is really the bane of any army that is trying to get up in your face. You have to get there, and that shooting can help.
The only reason I didn't include them, actually, because I did consider that heavily, because as I said at the top of the show, that shooting is clearly one of the biggest weaknesses that this army still has. But if you look at a standard board, right, in most scenarios you can deploy up to about 12 inches up. So even if your opponent is hugging the back line, they're roughly 36 inches away, and you're probably not going first. So if you put yourself behind terrain or do whatever you can to minimize the number of shots you're taking turn one, it's not that unlikely that you can be hitting them by the top of turn two. So you may only have to take one round of shooting.
Oh, that's a good point. Sometimes that can be enough with some armies, but that's a very good point. So you opted for, for the bodies, you opted for quick movement. The one thing that I'm sure everybody's going to be able to see with this army is it's still a low model count. I mean, you do have, when you compare to some of the horde army potentials, where there's 30 in a unit or even more, and you have multiples of those trying to take, and plus the new rules where if you have 20 plus in your unit, you could still score an objective. That this is going to really be deficient in terms of winning those particular scenarios. Yep. So I think you're hard pressed just because of the unit selection to really make the best effective army with Soulblight, because there really is no cheap volume units.
Absolutely. And that's where I think the Fellbats really have to come into play, is those kinds of scenarios. Like you have to throw the Fellbats at their 20 plus man squads and blow those up as fast as you can. Like your Fellbats have to basically be kamikazes just trying to do that.
Well, they can be. They certainly can be. They won't last long, but they can dish out some damage against the weak and meaty and medium level power units. Certainly the single wound units. They'll put a hurt on those guys. Certainly if they get the first activation. All right, let's move on to your next the next unit, and I'll go ahead and pull up some of the war scrolls as we go through them. So we've got your Vampire Lord again on a horse.
Yep. And this time I went with 2 Vampire Lord on horses, because I did want to bring a larger army and really showcase how, with the ally system, that you could do that with Soulblight, but still maintain some of the identity of what makes Soulblight unique. And so my first, my general has Mist Form and has the Ruby Vial. And the big point here is that the Mist Form is going to be used less aggressively with this general, obviously, because it's less of a killing machine. But the Mist Form ability is so good to just get out of trouble. And it really pairs nicely with the fact that these vampiric units can heal whenever they kill a model. Because if your general's in trouble and you're facing an enemy army, if there's an enemy chaff unit nearby, then run away from the squad you're fighting, go charge into that chaff unit, kill a couple guys, and heal if it's safe enough. It's a bit of a gamble, but it at least gives you that option. And then the Ruby Vial is really key here. Now, this army, I have 660 points for reinforcement, and I wanted that for flexibility. If you're playing in a match where you're going to need bodies, then you can just keep summoning in zombies with these 2 guys, merge the squads, and quite easily get to multiple 20-man squads to contest objectives. But if you're not playing a scenario that requires those kinds of things, and maybe your 40-man skeleton squad is enough that you're bringing as an ally, then you can bring in Terrorgeist, which is why the Ruby Vial is here. Because if you bring in the Terrorgeist and you position everything for that one really knockout punch turn, and you use the neg 1 to your opponent's bravery, and then the fact that you have the necrotic as well, you can really force a lot of enemies to, number 1, flee from the the battle shock, and number 2, to just die from all the mortal wounds that those 2 terror guys could be putting out.
Very nice, and you have enough points for 2 terror guys for sure.
Correct.
Yeah. So you still have the similar battle line set. So we got some of the Blood Knights, 2 squads of these guys. What can we say about them that we haven't said already? I think the biggest thing that I like about them is that they can actually restore a full model every turn.
Yep, and on top of that, they're pretty unique in that ability, because we've seen units, for example, in the Tomb Kings, like the Necropolis Knights, that could do similar effects, but they also have the vampiric ability where they can heal injured models. So if you lose a model and, say, another wound is taken on to a second model in your Blood Knight squad, but you kill an enemy model, you can not only restore that lost model, but bring that injured model back up to full health.
Yeah, I've also played the shenanigan game where I've retreated these guys out just to be able to get that, if I, like, say that when they've gone down to 3 and I'm worried that they're going to get wiped out, I've retreated them out and been able to come back well before the end of the game, and they're at full strength, and then they also are on a charge.
Absolutely.
I'll retreat them out and then charge something in, so that whatever I was fighting is locked up, even sacrificing something. Typically, I've done that with Hex Wraiths, for example.
Yep.
The 1-2 punch. That's been kind of like my signature Hex Wraith Blood Knight combo. But you could do with a number of different things, like Vargeist, for example.
Yep.
And then these guys just come back, and even a 5-man unit could put a hurt on you. Yep.
It can absolutely tank. It can hold down an objective if you need it. The horn blower is really good too. I think a lot of people overlook that you'll never have anything less than 6 inches when it charges, and that's a big deal with these guys moving 12 inches. 10 inches in this list, but 12 inches in a lot of possible lists with Swift Death.
All right. And then you have your only 3 in the Vargeist, but let me go put that up so we can take a look and see. Vargeist they definitely have good damage potential.
They do.
I have a conversion of these because I have the Bretonnian themed Death Army with 1 million conversions, and these are my I call them my Peg Whites.
Uh-huh.
So they're converted Pegasus Knights.
Yes.
So they have the bat wings instead.
Mine are actually converted as well. Mine are converted Reaper's gargoyles, because I like more of the gargoyle aesthetic.
Very cool. All right, we got to take a look at that. Have you shown a picture of that on, like, say, the PMP or anything?
I have. It's been a while. I've got 3 different ones that are posed 3 different ways, but they're nothing too fancy, but I can show them later if you'd like.
Sure. I'm always interested in conversions and anything that can inspire people to kind of, if they're interested in making the model their own, especially using the bits from these kits. I think that's something great, because that's a really underappreciated part of the hobby. All right, so let's take a look at Vargeists.
Okay, especially if you do it for cheap, because, for example, my Reaper models were $3 a piece as opposed to the standard price of these GW ones.
Hey, you're saving a few bucks. That's always a big thing when it comes to expensive hobbies like this.
Absolutely.
All right. So these guys, they don't have as much staying power, but they hit.
Definitely.
They hit hard.
They do. And the really nice thing here, and the 2 things I really want to spotlight that they kind of have as one-ups over Blood Knights, because I did say earlier that with the Swift Death, I do consider Blood Knights to be, in essence, categorically better. They're a 4 wound each model, so they're 1 more, which is nice, because that does mean that you have to take 1 more wound before your attacks drops at all, which is not something to be overlooked. Mm-hmm. And then in addition, they have the same number of attacks, the same to hit, to wound, and all of just the riders of the Blood Knights, but they're an automatic damage 2. Which means that, Blood Knights are damage 1, D3 on the charge, which means Blood Knights are terrific on the charge, but when they get bogged down, there's a significant drop-off in potential damage ability. With the Vargeist, you don't suffer any of that, and that's a huge thing, I think. Also, they're automatically a flying unit, so you don't have to take Swift Death for these guys to be very fast at 12 inches movement and to be a flying unit. Then the fact that their leader makes 4 attacks instead of 3, so you're actually up to 10 attacks instead of 9. And then the Blood Madden Frenzy is a really nice, just kind of, I guess, icing on top, because every time you slay an enemy model, roll a die on a roll of a 6, you get to make an additional attack. So there is the potential for a lot of damage to be inflicted. Honestly, in most rounds of combat, I get that off at least once.
Really? Yeah, I rarely get it. I often forget about it. I would like to have seen these guys have some kind of a vampiric regen also. They don't have any of that, unfortunately. So when they get counterattacked, they tend to go down pretty hard, even with that extra wound. But
they can.
Usually, you don't want to charge these guys in unless you know you're going to activate them early.
I quite often use these guys more of to flank an opponent, or to maybe even be a bit of a screen to protect potentially even more important unit like a Blood Knight squad that really needs to hit something else, because they are so fast and because they can fly. If you hide them behind a building or something, and then you can just jump over and engage the enemy on your terms.
All right, so that's the Vargeist. Now I don't have these scrolls. I think. So actually, I do. I'm wrong. I do have these. We have some allies, and one of the first ones you have listed here is the White King. Now, with allies, there is the Soulblight Allegiant benefits won't apply, which is really weird to me, because the staple of Death Army is that 6-up, ward type save. But
right.
With the ally rules in GHB 17, you're not going to get that for your ally units. It's only for the Soulblight. So what I like about what you've dreamed up here is taking a powerful unit and supplementing it with this White King for a specific reason.
Yep. So the reason is, of course, well, first off, I have to say I love that GW discounted the unit of 40 skeletons to fit with a White King perfectly for a 400-point ally if you choose to max them out.
Yeah, if let me go pull that up. I wonder, you think that was intentional?
I do. I believe it was. We've seen other units like Giants and all have minor point discounts, and a lot of people have pointed to, well, that fits really nicely as allies at level X, Y, or Z, and I don't believe that was not intentional here either.
So what's the discount actually?
So the discount for them is that they're
on a horde, right?
Yeah, for the horde unit. Ordinarily, it's 80 points for 10 for each of the Skelebums that you take. But whenever you take the full unit of 40, it's 280, which is a 40-point discount for the final 10-man squad. Yeah,
and I don't think a lot of people who have not faced skeleton warriors appreciate how effective they can be. Now they're not perfect. They're not going to do this against everything because they don't have a rend in particular. Right. But they can dish out a ton of attacks.
They can. And that's part of why they're here. That's actually the reason why they're here in this army, because they provide that horde unit, so you can capture a point that needs 20 or more men with 40 of them. Now, unfortunately, we're not going to get the White King's command ability because he's not our general. But that's negated because in this army, we are bringing a Vampire Lord just by itself who has a command ability that says pick a friendly death unit within 15 inches and give them all +1 attack for all their melee weapons. So we're still getting the same effect as though our White King was our general, but we're getting it on our Soulblight model.
Right. It still works.
Yep. So the Skeleton Warriors we're arming with the spears because the 2-inch range is really what we want here. They are ordinarily a 5-up, 4-up, but they get +1 to hit if they're within range of a death hero, so 18 inches from your army. So they're hitting on a 4-up, 4-up. And then because of their Skeleton Legion ability, because we have 30 or more models, we're making 3 attacks each base. But because of that command ability, which we'll be casting on them a fair few times, in combat they'll be making 4 attacks each. So with 40 of them, that's of course assuming you haven't lost anyone, that's 160 attacks each turn.
Yep, that's very nice.
That can just grind through stuff.
Yeah, it against units that don't have incredible saves, you're gonna munch them. You're gonna munch them. If it's a 4-up save, you're gonna. I wouldn't say necessarily delete units, but you're gonna put a major hurt. You could do some serious hurt on monsters as well because they're just gonna fail saves eventually. Yeah. Unless it's like the 2-up re-rolling ones type situation, which is rare. But you'll see those are out there, but they're definitely rare. You also have I mean, it might be tough to grind through units of Stormcast, but even Stormcast with like 3-up saves, they're gonna fail those.
Yep.
And you're gonna have enough attacks when you're rolling enough dice that you're gonna start removing models. So and with the spears, 2-inch range means more of them are in there.
Yep.
Yeah, I love a skeleton warrior unit, 40 strong.
Yep.
So yeah, it's pretty interesting and in perfect size for, like you said, for allies.
And then they do heal D6 models each hero phase, so they're going to stay around the battlefield pretty well. They do have the potential +1 save against enemy weapons that do not have a rend, so they're going to be at a 5-up, which is not amazing, but at least it's a little bit more. And whenever you combine it with that regen, it's nice. Every little helps.
They do have the ability to absorb some punishment and then regen back. The White King.
And this really takes them, in my opinion, up to that next level. And again, you talked about how, well, we basically lose that, in essence, ward save because we're bringing them as allies. Well, he kind of negates that because of his Infernal Standard. Now, the Infernal Standard says that that each time a death model from your army is slain within 9 inches of the Infernal Standard, on a 6, it ignores the wound or mortal wound that killed it, which is really nice.
So it's basically like that, like an extended range command ability. I mean, allegiance ability.
Absolutely. And if he chooses not to move, he can up the range to 18 inches.
Yeah, that's often overlooked. I certainly am one to forget that quite a bit. And he's no slouch. I mean, he's only got 5 wounds, but a 3-up save is not bad. And certainly if you're in terrain, that becomes a 2-up. So that's nothing to laugh at.
And his damage output isn't terrible. And you'll be taking him on a horse because, again, it's free. So he's making 6 attacks.
Yeah, I converted one specifically on a horse
I did too.
Yeah. Okay, so we're looking at now also some additional reinforcement points. And as you pointed out earlier, this is where you're going to try and summon in a 1 or 2 Terrorgeist. Now, that's your particular goal, is to throw some more Terrorgeist on the table. That's a high cost to summon. So there's a good chance you could fail that.
Yep. And that's part of why we have 2 Vampire Lords. And really, the 660 points, I wanted it to be so high because that's the pie in the sky dream. It's not likely to happen. But if you do get it off and you do get this combo with the Ruby Vial and the necrotic abilities, you can have incredible turns that just obliterate your opponent off the table like they were just shot with the Death Star. Mm-hmm. But the 660 points are also really good with these 2 vampires because, as I mentioned before, if the scenario calls for it, you can summon other things like zombies. You can summon other things like these fellhounds and all. Like, the nice thing about summoning is that it allows all armies that have it, but especially Death, to kind of get around these limitations on ally points and to, without breaking allegiance, summon in other things to deal with what the circumstance calls for.
Yeah, it's a really good point because you're not going to benefit from the allegiance 6-up save, but you still are going to be able to bring in some very effective units that are in situational. I mean, you could summon in anything that has the ability to be summoned. You could summon in Nighthaunt. You could summon in some Spirit Hosts.
Yep.
And while they won't get that 6-up save, if they're near that White King, they'll get that 6-up save. Still
on their final wound. Yep.
Yeah. But they're still effective just by the nature of their rules on the War Scroll. So there's a lot of flex with even if you only get that 1 Terrorgeist in, and you decide, you know what, I don't want to try and risk another one. It's getting late in the game. I'm on turn 4, and I need to bring in some units. Try to summon something that's a little bit lower cost. Yeah, that put a little help in to replace maybe some of the losses you've taken. So it definitely gives you some depth. All right, let's take a look at your last list.
Okay, this one's, I would say, a bit of a meeting in the middle. If the first one is, this is what I really want to do to explore what Soulblight can do by itself, really maximize on the strengths of the faction. And the second one is saying, okay, I'm looking at all the scenarios that are likely to be played in tournaments. What is the way I can build a flexible army that still can do the good things that Soulblight can do, but also can really play to these scenarios? Well, if that's the case, then this third one's a happy medium. We again have the Vampire Lord on Zombie Dragon with the same equipment, the Lance, Shield, and Chalice. Never bring anything else as far as I'm concerned with her. Again, the Mist form is a beautiful ability. I will take that almost every single time because, again, even if it's not being used for offensive purposes, the defensive capabilities of that are quite nice. Again, I have a Vampire Lord on horse with a Sanguine Banner, and this time I have a second Vampire Lord on horse because it's just nice to have that additional basically ward save caddy out there
Mm-hmm.
to stick with your different troops, help keep them alive. And in this particular army, because unlike the first army, we do have reinforcement points available, having 3 potential wizards to cast different summoning spells. Maybe 2 of them want to summon something this turn, and the third one wants to cast Mystic Shield or Arcane Bolt. You have a little bit more flexibility in the magic phase with this army. And then in the battle line, we actually have a bit of a flip from the normal. We have 1 unit of 5 Blood Knights and 2 units of 3 Vargeist, and that's quite simply just to save the 100 points to give us a little bit more flexibility with our summoning. And then again, we have some smaller Bat Bomb units. We have 2 units of 6 and 1 unit of 3. And if you really want, you can drop the last unit of 3 Fell Bats if you want to bring in, say, a Terrorgeist or something bigger. But I like to have a 1-to-1 ratio of Fellbat units to battle line units, so that each of my battle line units in particular circumstances would have the option of basically being escorted by a bat bomb going before them before they themselves clash in combat.
Yeah, I like the flexibility. One of the things I think I would like to see, I would have tried to adapt this list, the core of this list. I would have probably taken one of the Vampire Lords on a horse and added some points to it and made it the Coven Throne.
Yes, I considered that as well. The only reason I didn't, again, was I wanted enough reinforcement points to have a good amount of flexibility to summon what the scenario called for.
Right, yeah. If you wanted to summon, 40 zombies, you can certainly have done that. Absolutely. All right. Well, look, there's a look at 3 different army lists. Let me just before I get everybody all
tripping out.
That's the hard part. We'll get a little psychedelic 80s in there. So your overall thoughts again, on the Soulblight. What appeals to you over some of the other death combinations you might have seen?
Well, number one, like I said, the speed. I love the fact that it's a fast army and we can kind of get around other armies' shooting ability to a degree by getting in their faces so fast that it doesn't matter. And number 2, it's really just thematic. I like a lot of the aesthetic of the models. They attracted me at the beginning. Vlad was actually my first death model, and he's the reason I play death. And so because of that kind of, emotional tie to the character, that really drew me to vampires in general. And then seeing the potential for Soulblight and just trying out some of these unexpected combos from people who I've played against a lot with death, and trying these completely different tricks from what I've been able to do before. Because death before was more of like a grind them out kind of army in most cases, where I would take your punch and counter punch and just eventually wear you down. With this kind of army, I don't think a lot of opponents are going to be ready for initially the kind of quick, in-your-face, hard-hitting offense that this army is going to bring to the table.
And I think the best thing about it really is that the obvious disadvantages are made up for with allies.
Yep.
Summoning points and allies. It used to be where it was. I felt, and I think you made this point also earlier today when we were speaking, that used to feel like the reinforcement changes with GHB1 was a deficiency.
Yep.
And now that flexibility really feels like an advantage.
Absolutely. It takes summoning from, which clearly had to drop from pre-General's Handbook 1 to General's Handbook 1. Like the summon anything whenever you want was too powerful, obviously. But we did get a bit of a buff. If you want, I was going to actually show the Vargeist. They're real simple.
Let's see them.
So these are the little Reaper Bones gargoyles. So I just took 3 different ones. This is actually what the base model looks like ordinarily. And I just cut them. And because they're bones, they're really easy to reposition. So this one's wings, I put back a little bit further like he's landing and sitting there. I repositioned his arm like he's kind of, plotting his next move while he's just sitting there chilling. And this one is my personal favorite. He actually just popped off the stone, so I'll hold him like he normally is. But I got this rather large rock, and there's a skull in the base. I don't know how well you can see it. But ordinarily, I have the guy kind of hanging from the rock like this. So he looks like he's perched on it, about to like leap off to his next target. Again, because they're that very soft resin, they're very reposable, and you can put a lot of character into them.
Very cool. Any closing points? Any closing comments?
I would highly recommend trying out Soulblight. Maybe you were interested in death before, but maybe the way it played didn't appeal to you, or maybe you are an old death player and you're troubled by the changes to death. And what you've really got to do is just flip all of your knowledge over on its head and say, this is going to operate completely differently, but it's an exciting new challenge that I'm really looking forward to trying out on the table week after week.
Yeah, I'm probably going to say this in every video. I've said this in the first unlocking for the GHB 17 that I did earlier today with Tyler. It's a very exciting time in the meta. This is time where we're going to really be exploring where it's going, what we're going to shake out, what's good, what's not. And I think it's a good time to actually test out these lists. We're going to find some really great gems, and the really good combinations are going to rise to the top. And I think I think over the next 6 months we're going to see some great changes. And I really do like what I see with Soulblight. I don't know if it's a tournament winner. I do feel that it's definitely a competitive. It has competitive capabilities. Definitely some possibilities because whatever deficiencies you have, you can find a way to make up for it. So let's see how it goes. We'll reporting back, I'm sure, when we get a chance to put the stuff on the table. So once again, you have a Tactica Tuesday show. All right, is that on your channel, or is it on Paul's channel, or do you alternate?
That's on my channel, Star Mini Gaming. So
Star Mini Gaming, I'm going to put the link in the notes. Check out James on Star Mini Gaming. Again, Tactica Tuesday. And, tune in for more of these. Sometime over the next week, I'm going to be scheduling the next batch of these. And if you have your own lists, or if you have some requests that you want to see, feel free to go ahead and post them in the in the comments section of the video. I try to respond to as many of these as I can. And once again, James, thanks for joining me and for coming in and going over the list. I really appreciate you joining me on the show.
Well, thanks for having me.
Have a good night, everybody.